Well, you mentioned Syrian refugees there. This is another thing that you've been tweeting about in the last few days, particularly after the Paris attacks. None of the arbiters of the Paris attacks are Syrian refugees. None of them are refugees at all. 3 of them were born in Paris. 3 of them are from Brussels. Why do you continue to perpetuate this idea that refugees have anything to do with the attacks?
I don't perpetuate the idea. The point I'm making is that ISIS is very active in Syria. ISIS controls Syrian towns. And so...
Absolutely, and that's undisputed.
Yeah. Undisputed, right. And now when you have a large influx of Syrians into Europe and into the United States, if you were ISIS, wouldn't you think that this was a rather easy way to send ISIS guys into Europe and the United States? Wouldn't that be a convenient and natural thought to you if you were trying to figure out how to get, for example, an ISIS sympathizer to Chicago? Wouldn't you say, you know what, all these refugees, they're going anyway, 100,000 of them. Can they possibly vet them all? I mean, you try to vet the guys I went to high school with, try to figure out who their friends are. This is in Mumbai. You wouldn't be able to do it. It's impossible. So this is a wonderful opportunity for ISIS. We should be aware of that, and that simply means we need to do heightened scrutiny. We need to be really careful because we know that the enemy can easily get through our borders this way.
Well, heightened security. So I understand in Europe, for example, they have the Schengen Agreement, which is basically an open border agreement. This is certainly something that both the French authorities, the authorities in Brussels, are going to be looking at a lot closely. They have said so in the last few days as well, since the attacks, that they're going to be looking at intelligence sharing a little bit more. That all makes sense. With regards to the United States and refugees coming into the US, how do you see that there is the same kind of threat that could be in Europe as there is for refugees coming into the United States?
See, I think when I look at the reaction to the Paris attacks, I'm not so much scared by ISIS as I am scared by the rather serene, almost whimsical, almost annoyed and indifferent tone of Obama. Contrast Obama with Hollande. So here's Hollande, he sounds like Churchill, right? These are barbarians, I'm going to be merciless, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the earth. Here's Obama. Well, that was kind of a setback. And now we have another apparently attempted bombing in Germany, I guess another averted setback. Well, these aren't just setbacks. A setback is when Obama says ISIS is contained. I guess very inconveniently the next day, the Paris attacks. So they're not contained. But how can an organization that is controlling towns in Afghanistan and Syria, that is downing a Russian airliner, that is causing havoc in France, how can that be considered a JV team? How can that be considered contained?
Well, the JV comment, I think he's since clarified, and that notion of containment, I'm not going to speak for the president, but he certainly has said that he clarified that he meant that physically they are still within the confines of Syria and Iraq, and they're not setting up mini caliphates in Paris, as an example. But to go back to my question, you didn't answer it. In terms of Syrian refugees coming to the United States, how can you see that they are posing any kind of actual serious threat when there have been no crimes committed by refugees? Germany put out a report that Germany, that has taken over 100,000 refugees, has said that their crime level hasn't increased once since they, not even by 1 percentage point, since they introduced and allowed refugees into their country.
Right, but remember that the whole point of terrorism is to do what hasn't been done before, right? Before 9/11, planes were never used to go into buildings. So if you had said, listen, what's wrong with giving Islamic radicals flight lessons because they've never flown planes into buildings? Yes, but that's because that's the new idea that occurred to them. So I'm simply saying now, something that we would previously be naive about, refugees, they're running away from persecution, we ought to take them in with open arms. And all I'm saying is now we realize, wait a minute, these refugees can be used as a way to smuggle bad guys into the United States.
That to me sounds a bit like Minority Report politicking, though.
Well, I think to me it sounds exactly like reading common sense into the headlines. So again...
But the common sense, I think, is taking a huge leap from facts that are just not there, and then using these immaterial, non-existent facts to then craft policy.
Let me ask you this.
Which doesn't sound intelligent to me.
If someone said to you, here are the resources to cover the expense, would you take a dozen of these refugees into your house, knowing as little as we do about them, and would you feel safe?
But we do know a lot about them, because the process to actually be a refugee in the United States can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months, the way that they're scrutinized. I mean, you said to yourself, you're an immigrant, I'm an immigrant, I have an accent, I'm here on a visa. the process for me to get any kind of visa is ridiculously inordinate, and I'm somebody who has, presence online, in
But we're not talking
newspapers,
about
all about
this.
that. No, I know, but
We're talking
you're
about-
saying about you're saying how can you verify that this person, 12 people, if 12 Syrians were to come into your house, how do you know that they're not anything dubious or criminal? Because the investigation and the background check that the Department of Homeland Security currently requires is around 18 months long.
But the refugee process tends to circumvent those things. We're talking about
doesn't circumvent
We're
those
talking
things.
about taking 100,000 people in a relatively short time. When you're talking about
No one's taking 100,000. The president had mentioned 10,000.
Well, no, 10,000 maybe immediately, but the numbers that have been talked about are much, much larger than that. Europe is taking a lot, and we're taking a lot. Look, the French are now saying we need to reassess the process. We just need to look at it harder. I'm very pro-immigrant. I'm an immigrant, and my politics.
Are you pro-immigrant?
Of course I am. My politics come out of that. This country was built by immigrants, and to me, the great power of conservatism, the reason I call myself a conservative, is I want a ladder of opportunity that I can climb up.
What do you think of the way that some of the 2016 candidates have been talking about immigrants? The front runners, Ben Carson, Donald Trump, have been making some very disparaging remarks about immigrants. Do you think that they're the wrong people to be leading the charge for the Republicans for 2016?
Well, first of all, I do think the Republican Party should not and cannot be the party against immigration. No. But I do think that there is a legitimate frustration with illegal immigration. No country can be a real country while having, in a sense, a completely porous border. If you go down to the border, as I did last year, you basically you see fences that keep stopping, fences with huge holes in them so that you can actually drive a car through them. So this is a fraud. This is an attempt to say to the American people, we have a fence, but look, you can come right through right here. And there's no one to stop you if you do. So
I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe that. I mean, I've been down to Tijuana as well, and I think that if I try and get through the line with my passport, I'm going to be stopped by the police.
No, don't be silly. We're not talking about going through the line. There's a little border post here, and then there are miles and miles of fence, and all I'm telling you is if you simply follow those fences, you will see the fence stops, and it literally becomes open country. You can just walk across the border.
I think there's a big difference between border security, which I think people on both sides agree is necessary. I mean, we are a sovereign country, and of course there needs to be border security.
Laws.
And we have laws, absolutely. But there is a big difference between that and then talking about whole people, as Donald Trump did, as rapists, as an example. Do you think that the frontrunners, Donald Trump and Ben Carson, are getting it wrong when it comes to immigration?
Well, I think that, as I say, I think that they are reflecting a deep frustration about the fact that the United States, the federal government, the states are doing better, but the federal government refuses ultimately to maintain borders. Now, as someone who went through the legal process, as I assume you did, it took us a lot of time, and it also cost us a fair bit of money.